Hello everyone, welcome to Bread and Roses. I hope you're doing well. I'm Maryam Namazie.
And I'm Fariborz, Pooya. In this week's program, we have an interview with Syed, ex-Muslims of North America.
We'll also be talking about the rise of the far right, the International Day Against Violence Against Women, and the 15 days that ensues. Our slice of life is about a Saudi woman's protest against the hijab, and our insane fatwa is from Daesh, and kittens and cats beware. Stay with us. In recent months, what has become very clear is that there is a rise of the far right, of fascism in a way, in many places, and it's something that is really alarming. Alarming also because I think people are not realizing the seriousness of the situation.
Absolutely. You had the extremists of various kinds in Europe and America actually coming to the fore and taking center stage, really. The narrative is taking center stage, and they actually taking a section of the population, been duped effectively by the arguments, be it through Brexit, make America great again. Under those banners, the far right is slithering and coming forward, and I think that's danger. People need to recognize it's a dangerous situation.
One of the things too is that because you have a section of the left that has apologized and legitimized the political Islamic movement, you've had lots of people sort of excusing the far right and saying, well, at least they're speaking about Islam, at least they're talking about Sharia law, and in a sense normalizing that sort of narrative. So you have, for example, people saying there's, supporting the EDL, the English Defence League, Pegida, and all of these groups, and criticizing people like myself who've said that these groups are fundamentally the same as the Islamist movement. They're both far right. And I think the more they gain power, the more that becomes obvious, because the more they're violent and their fascism shows through very well.
Absolutely. And one of the things is threat of violence. You'll see that Islamists anytime either they try to push forward, and if they can't convince people or get what they want, they resort to violence. And you see the right does that as well. They say, look, if we don't do this, if we don't get this, people are going to get really, really angry. We've heard that from Nigel Farage. We've heard that from the President-elect of America. He said, if I don't win, there's going to be riot and violence all over. So, I mean, that's the threat of violence to society is destabilizing in a way, and they share that characteristics with Islamists. I mean, that's very clear.
Yeah, and the other thing they share too is this sort of victim status that they give themselves, and I think it's linked to identity politics. And of course, when you start promoting identity politics, well, then it becomes very clear that people will start using white identity politics as well. And this idea of victimhood, even though the sort of far right wing that is promoting this narrative are actually people who are part of the elite, they have access to power, access to lots of money, and they feign to represent the little person, whereas in fact it's no such.
Yeah, and you can see this is well organized, all linked to higher echelons of power in society, and they've actually turned the art of convincing people into an impossible act to some extent. The billionaires, the powerful, they've decided that this is the only way to have the narrative against the establishment. We don't know who the establishment, if they're not the establishment. That narrative against the establishment, against the order, apparently, naturally try and sort of galvanize the anger of people and try to capitalize on anger, the real anger that exists in society, and use that. This is well organized.
Use that against people themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the first victims of Islamist movement, for example, has been people who supposedly label as Muslim. The first victims of the far right will be the working class that would not benefit an iota from the rise of the right wing. we'll see that immediately with the rise
Yeah,
of
and I think it's something
Brexit,
that
we'll see
really
that.
needs to be taken seriously. There's only so much that you can blame the pro-Islamist left for being responsible for the situation. There is a need to look at the far right, to see it for what it is, which is flat fascism. In the same way that Islamism is fascism, so is this, and to challenge it and head on, and not tolerate the xenophobia, the racism. All of this seems to have become so normalized. It's okay to have a discussion on migration, we're told, whereas it's wrapped up in bigotry and racism. We're not even allowed to use that word anymore because the pro-Islamist left has excused Islamism so much. Well, you've got large sections of people now excusing the far right, and neither one of them are excusable.
Yeah, but I think one of the key elements to convince people, and very quickly actually you could do that, because to unfold these sort of false narratives, is that they are against the working class. Every action they'll do, any real policy they implement, is anti-working people, and the working people will be the first victims of the far right gaining power anywhere.
Yeah, and let's now move on to the International Day Against Violence Against Women. It was on November 25th, and of course there's 15 days of actions and activities until December 10th, International Women's Day. And it's important for us to, make a stand in these days, every day, but especially in these days, against violence against women, which is so predominant, and particularly it's often very much part of the rules and regulations of many societies and countries. And so it's the law, and you're seeing even in places like Britain, with the imposition of Sharia law on sections of the population, that it's completely legitimized and legal.
Absolutely, and you'll see that this sort of International Day Against Violence Against Women has been, to some extent, they've used the social media in many countries, particularly in Iran, which I have followed. A lot of people express different forms of violence against women, whether it been through verbal to actual physical violence against women, the whole imposition of unequal society, for example, like Wales, and how that's actually violent against women, and the position of undermines the position of women, and the narrative that people use against women constantly being churned out by the state and the state media.
And especially because very often violence against women is wrapped up in cultural and religious justifications, and it sort of normalizes it and justifies it in a way that other forms of violence don't
Absolutely, yeah.
take.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, since it is this week, these 15 days, that we remember women's rights defenders, people who are putting their lives on the line, who are taking great risks to defend women's rights. And I think it's important to mention Atena Daemi here, who's a children's rights activist as well. She's an activist against executions in Iran, who has now been violently arrested again and is serving a 7-year prison sentence for her human rights activities.
Actually, she was out for a short period of time. She constantly campaigned in support of the political prisoners in Iran, who are really, really innocent people being incarcerated by the Islamic regime of Iran for just because they've raised human rights
So
issues.
we do need to defend Atema Daimi and all the women's rights defenders and human rights defenders that are languishing in prison. A while back, I interviewed Mohammed Syed at a Women in Secularism conference in Washington, D.C. that I attended. He is one of the founders of Ex-Muslims of North America, and I speak with him about the organization, the work that they're doing, but also this absurd case in which they were denied a anniversary cake because the bakery said that it was offensive, and after threats of legal action the bakery backed down. But a cake is offensive now.
Absolutely. I think but the issue is that because of the the spread of the narrative of ex-Muslims, the fact, the right to leave religion, and that's a fundamental right, these issues are coming to the fore. Previously people would have sort of kept silent about it. Now people are vocal, rightly so, and the right to free conscious, and freedom of thought is an important fundamental right.
Now listen to the interview and hear what Mohammed Syed has to say. Stay with us. Mohammed Syed, it's a great pleasure to have you on our program.
Great to be here.
I wanted to ask you about a case that I heard of where you had wanted a birthday cake for your 3rd anniversary. Tell us what happened.
So recently, the Reason Rally was this summer, and we were doing our 3rd anniversary around that. We had a lot of people coming in from around the country, and as a part of the celebration, one of our leaders basically called one of the bakeries in the area to make us a cake, a pretty standard thing. And the cake said a happy 3rd anniversary, and it had our logo on it, which is a double crescent. And the bakery refused. And the first person that was talking to them, they were rude to them and basically accused them of being bigots, like accused our members of being bigots. Then we called back and tried to escalate it, talk to the manager and stuff. We talked to the person in charge of the bakery, who also refused, but she was willing to escalate it to the management level. She called us back later and said that she's exhausted all options and nobody agrees and is willing to make the cake. And the thing is, the cake was, as I said, simply our logo. There was nothing offensive about it. Even if it was offensive, I don't see why they would be able to not create the cake. In any case, so after that, we talked to one of the legal groups in there that are allies of atheist groups, Freedom from Religious Foundations, and they served notice to the bakery. It's actually a chain, and it's very left-leaning, organic, hippie, that sort of establishment. And after legal notice was served on them about them basically violating the Constitution, they, within a few hours, responded and apologized and tried to make up for it. But the entire process took at least a week until we got to that point. But the idea that any bakery could simply, just based on ex-Muslims, that was offensive enough that they refused to serve us. And for one, it blew our minds that that's possible in the 21st century in America. We're not in a Muslim country. We're not in a theocracy. But beyond that, the other thing was that similar cases have happened where rights of other minorities have been, where they've been discriminated against, and usually had national headlines. And in this case, it wasn't covered at all. There were 1 or 2 conservative newspapers that covered it, and that was the extent of it. And the fact that it was a left-leaning grocery store that was doing it, to me, speaks volumes.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, but one of the first things is this idea that it's bigoted to be an ex-Muslim.
Yeah.
How, what do you say to that?
To me, that's an expression of bigotry to begin with, in the sense that for whatever reason, a lot of people, and this is more of a leftist issue, view us as essentially religious, that our essential identity is tied into religion. Like people in America or people in Europe, we can't transcend religion because that is who we are. And that to me is extremely bigoted. It's like saying that the white man is essentially a racist or essentially a misogynist, and any attempts to change that is violence being inflicted on that person, because that is a part of their core identity. How do we have any progress if we sort of tie people's identity back to the 7th century, which is essentially what was being done?
And also the whole idea that you had to do legal action or a threat to legal action before you got anything.
Yeah.
That is
and
really outrageous.
The fact is that we are an actual organization, a nonprofit. We have the means and the context to be able to initiate legal action. The average ex-Muslim doesn't. And we hear cases of discrimination like this all the time. We've heard cases in New York, in Virginia, and various areas where both left-leaning establishments and Muslims have refused service to ex-Muslims once they found out that the person was an ex-Muslim. But your average person doesn't have the capability to actually go after that and try to overturn it.
And what do you think? You keep mentioning left-leaning. Now I'm on the left myself as
Sure.
well, and so. But what is it about some sections of the left that cannot fathom the fact that there are ex-Muslims and that they have a right to leave Islam?
it's essentializing people. That's the biggest issue. They essentialize all people from, like, I'm from Pakistan, and I'm extremely left-leaning. I've been very active in the anti-war movement, but for them, it's there's essentials of other cultures, and therefore anything that goes against that is betraying that. So we are seen as race traders, and therefore it's anything that attacks Muslim identity is an attack on their core and must be pushed back against. And part of it, I think, is due to right-wing racism towards people that appear to be Muslim. So there's right-wing racism, and as a counter to that, there's left-wing racism that tries to hold Muslims to that identity. So it's a yin and yang that's sort of trapping Muslims in this shell where they have to be religious.
So is that one of the reasons why the ex-Muslims of North America was established? Why did you establish it?
Initially, it was because of the fact that ex-Muslims are extremely isolated. One of the common lines that we hear, and we still hear it, is "I thought I was the only one," and we wanted to change that dynamic. We started up with having meets in Washington D.C. where we were just trying to get people together, but the impact of it was there were people coming in from 6 hours away, driving, taking buses, just for a couple of hours to meet other ex-Muslims and to not feel so alone. For the first few events we held, we had people cry. We had people say that they hadn't spoken to anybody in over 10 years about where they were. And that spoke to us that there was a wider need, and sort of everything else grew out of that. We decided to establish similar communities around the country, and then as that happened, we realized the need for activism work where ex-Muslims were being discriminated against, or the pressure being applied on them from Muslim communities as well. None of that was being spoken to by anybody else, and there was a dire need to do that.
Some will ask why you even use the term ex-Muslim. It could be offensive to so many people.
Something being offensive is not an argument from my perspective. From my perspective, Islam is offensive. Misogyny within Islam is offensive. The Quran talking about killing apostates is offensive. There are lots of things that are offensive, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the right to exist. We deal with things that we deem offensive by challenging them, by speaking about them. The other part of it is ex-Muslim as a word is sort of a political statement where we want to distinguish that we're coming from these backgrounds that were largely Muslim and we've left them. We're trying to reach back to what our culture was prior to Islam, or establishing new identities. A lot of it is honoring those that are in Muslim countries and can't actually speak up. We have people that have suffered for centuries in various countries, free thinkers going back to Al-Razi and before that. And if you look at every single century, there have been free thinkers in every Muslim country that have tried to speak up and have invariably been silenced. We now have the ability to actually speak up and demand that change happen. So it's sort of honoring them as well. The other aspect is that if you look at our histories, a lot of it has been entirely erased. If in North Africa, there was Namazie culture, Persian empire predated Islam. I'm from Pakistan. The Indus Valley civilization is 5,000 years old. The Egyptian civilization is 5,000 years old. A lot of that history has been entirely erased because from an Islamic perspective, history starts when Islam starts. So I'm not willing to let go of that. And none of us should be, because there are so many wonders and so many things that have been achieved in our past that we don't know about. And it's our duty to discover that and honor that.
Do you see a change from the past, let's say from 10 years ago, on how ex-Muslims are viewed?
Both positive and negative. Negative is we're more demonized because we're speaking up more. And the positive, obviously, is that more and more people are speaking up. So the biggest thing is as people speak up, it gives other people courage. So we're, as I was mentioning, running communities in various cities. And what that has done is it has empowered people. We've seen people that weren't willing to speak up within their families, and they are speaking up now. And as a result, other people are leaving. We have people who joined, and one by one, their entire families have left religion, and they're pushing outwards. So it's very encouraging that people are speaking publicly and are pushing back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The insane fatwa this week is from ISIS against kittens and cats.
The cat? sort of given up giving fatwa against people.
They're
Now
after
they moved on to the cats and kittens.
Well, there's a very serious reason why it's cats and kittens. It's because it goes against their beliefs, ideology, and vision.
Oh, they have a discussion with the cats, and the cat said, "We don't agree with your ideology." I mean, do you speak the cat language today?
Yes, yeah. They
So why? I mean, I don't understand, Maryam. Come on, enlighten us.
You really want to understand?
I need to understand
what they're doing. There is no understanding.
There's no rational.
No.
Just I think they're finished. Nobody accepts them now. They're chasing the cats and having a debate with the cats. I think there's no reason. They've lost the whole.
They've lost the plot.
They lost the plot
Badly.
Poor cats and kittens.
The slice of life this week is from Saudi Arabia, and it is of a brave woman there who tweeted on social media that she was going to breakfast in Riyadh without her veil and abaya, and she's photographed herself. And of course, it's so wonderful and encouraging and brave, and it reminds me of the wonderful brave women in Iran who are removing their veils.
Absolutely, and that brings so much smile and joy to everybody's life, because we know there is a huge resistance in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Pakistan, anywhere there is Islamic ridden society where Islam is dominant. We know there's huge resistance. We need to recognize this, and this is a beautiful moment that everybody needs to celebrate and support people like that.
Definitely. I mean, she's received lots of threats, but she has also received lots of support, and we have to make sure that the support drowns out any of the threats and violence.
Absolutely. This is going to bring us to the end of our program.
Yes, we've reached the end of our program. We hope you enjoyed this week's program, and we will see you again at the same time and same place next week. Until then, have a great week.
Goodbye.
Hi, I'm Maryam Namazie.
And I'm Fariborz Pooya.
We're hosting a program called Bread and Roses. It's a weekly program that's broadcast in Persian and English in the Middle East and North Africa, primarily Iran as well. And it's also shown on YouTube internationally.
And we've been doing this since last May. We're coming up to our year's anniversary, and we've had quite a lot of fun making these videos. We
discuss taboo-breaking, free-thinking ideas. The Islamic regime of Iran has called us immoral and corrupt.
And that's why you need to support us. We are the alternative voice in Middle East and North Africa.
Of corruption and immorality. So do support us. Here's a short video from Patreon that explains how you can help us with even just $1 a week. That's nothing. Support us.
Patreon lets fans become patrons of their favorite artists and content creators. It's different than Kickstarter because it's not about one big project that requires lots of funding. It's more for bloggers or YouTubers or webcomics, anyone who creates on a regular basis. Here's how it works. When you become a patron, you're agreeing to give an artist a tip of an amount you set every time they release a piece of content, whether it's a new song, a video, or a recipe. You can set a monthly maximum to make sure that you're always within your budget. Choose an amount, enter your payment information, and you're done. Becoming a patron allows you to view and post in the artist's stream, and in exchange for your support, artists offer additional patron packages, which might include monthly Google Hangouts, music production tutorials, pre-sale concert tickets, or anything they can offer as a way to say thanks. Patreon, empowering a new generation of content creators.